Every time there's an election year, evangelicals are often at the forefront. They've become very important in terms of trying to understand contemporary American politics. This book is going to help you to understand, well, who are we even talking about?
Hello, I'm Rachel Bomberger with Eerdmans Publishing. Here today with me is Heath Carter, who is co-editor with Laura Porter of the new book, Turning Points in the History of American Evangelicalism. Hi, Heath.
Good to be here. Thanks so much.
So this book, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. I mean, this is a really exciting new volume that covers the full sweep of the history of American evangelicalism from its earliest days in the American colonies all the way up to the present. And those stories are told in these really just engagingly written, accessible chapters, each focusing on a single turning point in the history of American evangelicalism. So these moments where something changed that dramatically impacted the kind of trajectory of this particular tradition in the history of Christianity. And we've got a whole variety of different kinds of turning points represented in the book. I mean, everything from kind of big things that went on for a long time, like the Enlightenment. So there's a chapter on the Enlightenment as a turning point in the history of American evangelicalism, to much more focused things like Grant Wacker's written a chapter on a 1949 revival, Billy Graham revival, that in his view really shifted the trajectory of evangelicalism in the second half of the 20th century. So a really interesting array of different kinds of pieces and really by the leading historians in the field.
Mm-hmm. We like to think of history sometimes as being a nice, neat, straight timeline, but it isn't.
Yeah.
There are these big moments of change.
Yeah.
So in focusing on these moments, what can we learn about evangelicalism as a movement throughout U.S. history?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that historians are most interested in, sometimes when people just take history in elementary school or high school, they think that history is all about constructing these timelines and, this happened at this date. And sometimes they think it's about memorizing dates. Yes. And actually, I mean, we're really, to be honest, I'm not that great with dates. I mean, we're really interested in bigger questions about change over time. How is life different today than it was 100 years ago or 300 years ago? And we're also interested in these questions about why did things change? Why did that happen and not this? Historians are going to usually argue that nothing's inevitable. So if things aren't inevitable, why did they happen the way that they did? And this book is really excellent at helping to, I think, engage a broad base of readers with those kinds of questions about, why is it, for example, we've got a chapter on the Great Migration of African Americans from the South to the North. You wouldn't think about that necessarily as being a turning point in the history of American evangelicalism, but the author of that chapter, Dennis Dickerson, argues that really this was a landmark shift in the ways that African American evangelicals practiced their faith, in the kinds of sermons they would have heard, in the kinds of music. I mean, it's the origins of gospel music. It's the origins of a kind of fiery black preaching style that would become known nationally, but really emerged in this particular historical moment in the early to mid 20th century. So I think that anyone who's interested in the history of American evangelicalism is going to find in this book a chapter or multiple chapters that will really engage them and bring them deeply into these questions about why did that happen and not something else, and why on earth did it happen that way?
Yeah, I love the way that this approach sort of turns history from a series of dates on a calendar to a series of stories with each has particular plot points that change the course of the narrative.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Which is a much more interesting way to think about history.
Yeah. And we were looking at these kind of, also just these eruptions of, George Marsden's got a chapter on something he knows an awful lot about, the rise of fundamentalism. Mm-hmm. Edith Bloomhofer with a chapter on the rise of Pentecostalism. Just chapters on moral reform and the emergence of the kind of domestic family as an important part of being faithful. I think there's something for everybody. It's great.
And you can learn a lot about who evangelicals are today and why they do the things they do and say the things they say from understanding where they come from.
Every time there's an election year, evangelicals are often at the forefront. They've become very important in terms of trying to understand contemporary American politics. But oftentimes in those conversations, it seems as though they kind of appeared out of nowhere. This book is going to help you to understand, well, who are we even talking about? And how did they get here? And what have been the different influences that have led to the development of particular political cultures within this kind of family of American Christian churches? So I think for people who want to understand the United States today, for people who are looking, to understand further, well, what is this? Who are evangelicals and where did they come from? I mean, this book really answers those questions, and I think it's unique in that it tells the full story. I mean, oftentimes, the problem with academic history is they can be very focused and very specialized, and they may be of great interest to those of us with their PhDs, but sometimes we're not as good at telling the big story. And this book tells the big story, which is really, I think, will make it appealing to a wider audience.
So who do you think will be reading this book, and how will they use it, and what do you hope they take away from it?
Yeah, I think this is a book that could be read by a lot of different types of people. I mean, I think it'll be of great interest to other scholars who are looking for just a nice, accessible book that they could assign in their classes or to dive in themselves. These are, again, essays by the foremost experts in the history of American evangelicalism. I hope that this book will also be widely read by folks in church Sunday school classes and the like. It's the type of book that really, when we were writing it, and the book is in part to honor Mark Knoller, who is one of the most important historians of American evangelicalism today. And Mark has always written both for the academy and for the church and audiences beyond it. And this book is really designed partly by way of honoring his work to try to do exactly that, and to appeal to scholars, but also to appeal to church folks and just anyone out there who wants to, again, understand more about the kind of vital intersection of religion and American life.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Mark Knoller, who is, the inspiration behind this volume. In what way has his work been sort of foundational for you and for the other contributors? Yeah,
it's a great question. I mean, we actually tell I'll give you a little sneak preview in the introduction. Okay. We talk about how 1976, Time and Newsweek named 1976 the year of the evangelical. It was a year in which both of the major presidential candidates were identified as born again, and a year in which evangelicals seemed to be kind of coming into the national spotlight in a new way. But if in that year you had tried to do what I was saying a moment ago and look into the history, who are these evangelicals and where did they come from, there wasn't a lot out there. Mark Knoller is he's part of a small generation of scholars whose work has really helped to define a whole field and helped to explain these vital questions about what is American evangelicalism, where did it come from, and they've told its story. And Mark has really been one of the key people telling that story as it extends all the way back into the colonial period and all the way up to the present day. So, in terms of people who have really made an impact on the way we tell American religious history, it's hard to think of anyone in the last generation more important than Mark Knoller.
And everyone else is in this book.
Yeah, exactly. And all the others are already, they've written the chapters that comprise this really excellent study.
Well, it does look to be an excellent book, and we're very pleased and proud to be working with you to bring it out.
Thank you. It's been a delight. Really, really excited to see it come out.
Thanks to you and to Laura for putting it together.
Absolutely.
And thanks for talking with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
The book, again, is Turning Points in the History of American Evangelicalism with co-editor Heath Carter.